So question 3 then from the 2022 Higher Maths Paper 1, 3-mark question, function and the inverse function. A function is defined by this simple set of operations here. You have to find what the inverse function is, the one that undoes that, the one that takes you back to the number you first put in. Well, that's such a simple one, you could just do that in your head. What happens with it? You start with a certain number x. What does this say you do to it? Well, first of all, you do the multiplication part. You start with x, so you divide it by 3. Then you add on 4. How can you undo that? Just go through those steps in the reverse order, undoing what you did to retrace your step. So you would take away 4, then multiply by 3, and that's the answer. Take away 4, multiply the whole thing by 3. Still, you won't be able to do that and get all the 3 marks. You have to show some working. So, how does this work again? You start with a number, you apply the rule, and it produces an answer which we could call y. And that rule's called h. That's the function. The inverse starts with the result and takes you back to the starting number, and that's the one you call the inverse function. There's also another part which is, there's a set of numbers you can start with called the domain, and there's a set of numbers that you end up on called the range. But you don't need to know that for this question. This is just how do I find this inverse function? Well, one way is to find y, just write down the steps that it took to get there, which were these steps. H of x equals that, which equals y. So I've got this to rearrange. So starting from that line there, I can just say, well, take the 4 across. I'd rather take the 4 across than multiply everything by 3, because then I just have to take the 3 across once and do 3 times the whole lot, which is what we said. How do you undo it? Take off the 4, multiply the whole thing by 3. Now, how do you express this in this form, though? Well, strictly speaking, this operation applies to putting y's in. So the next line should really be the inverse function, because it's acting on a y, would give you 3 times y minus 4. Now, you may well not put that down straight away. However, that's what that strictly says, because this operation is acting on y's. But once you've got the rule, once you've got this rule, those are just like tokens. You could put anything there. So the convention is that you use x for the unknown. So that's the same as saying h of whatever is 3 times whatever minus 4. It's always the same rule, doesn't matter what you put in, and the convention is just using x. Now the 3 marks were, the first step was to equate the y and the h of x. I've sort of snuck it in at the end here rather than writing out again y equals h of x, which you could do, I suppose, but I just reckon that would have been sufficient. Would have been to equate them, the answer with the original, then rearrange it to read x equals instead of y equals, but finish it off in this form, finish it off with x's in it. So according to the marking scheme, it doesn't matter if you put this line in. You may well be used to just jumping straight from there to there and ignoring that line. Just as soon as you've got the result x equals, you put that in and just change everything to x's. But that's really the step that you go through in between. Now, another way, a more sophisticated way that doesn't involve this jumbling of x's and y's that may confuse you, is simply to say these two functions undo each other. If you apply h and then apply the inverse of h, it just takes you straight back. Same the other way around. If you apply the inverse of h, that's this function, and then apply the original one, it'll take you back to the original number. So, you'd start off this method by saying h acting on the inverse function on whatever gives you back whatever. You tend to just use x, that's the standard. Doing that would give you a mark. Now what does h do to anything it gets hold of? It does 4 plus a third of whatever it gets hold of, and it's getting hold of the inverse function. Now putting that down gets a mark. Now it's just a case of solving that. So a third of that inverse function would be x, take the 4 across and subtract. So that inverse function must be, take that 3 across and multiply the whole side, same as before. Now that's a much neater way, because it doesn't involve these x's and y's and suddenly changing from one to the other, which might confuse you if you don't appreciate the fact that a letter is just a token. It could be any letter. And the problem here was originally you had to use two different letters to separate the starting number from the finishing number.